Oh, gross. Slither stars Nathan Fillion, Elizabeth Banks, Michael Rooker, Greg Henry, and is directed by James Gunn. What's up, guys? One movie that I cannot believe I have not reviewed yet is Night of the Creeps. I've done a D-Watch for Night of the Creeps, but it happens to be like one of my favorite 80s movies. It's such a childhood memory. And so, this movie Slither came out back in 2006. I remember when it first came out too, and I remember like the slugs. I never saw the movie until recently.
From Universal Pictures comes a film so shocking,
We've got a real problem here.
so disgusting,
Don't let him in your mouth!
it will change the face of horror.
I always thought that this movie was kind of an homage to Night of the Creeps. And even that has like kind of an alien subplot. You know, B-movie, schlocky, alien subplot. But after I watched this movie, oh boy, this is very different than Night of the Creeps. And it was a good friend of mine, Lindsay from Mother Mayhem. She kicked me in the butt with this movie and said, you have to watch this movie. I can't believe you haven't seen this. This is like one of her favorite movies, I think. After watching this, I completely understand where she's coming from because this movie is freaking bonkers. I might say bonkers at least 4 more times throughout this review. In a good way, though, in a good way. It's James Gunn, right? Like James Gunn, this guy had a background in Troma, okay? He worked for Troma Pictures. And if you're familiar with Troma Pictures, think of like really bad acting, B-level horror, and the biggest thing is just buckets and buckets of like practical effects, and not just blood, but like gross, slimy stuff. That's Troma Pictures. And really the gloves are off. You can push the plot to the rear and no pun intended, and you can just focus on just showing the most outlandish practical effects that you can possibly imagine. Stuff that you normally won't even see in more like mainstream horror fare. And definitely those that are like not really big fans of horror in general, they're definitely not going to be interested in like Troma type stuff. So anyway, diving in, let's start off with a quick plot synopsis because this does have a very interesting plot. And you know I'm a character guy, right? And at Slither's core, I always get Slither and Sliver mixed up, and I've literally said Sliver instead of Slither before, but I'm going to say Slither because that's the title of the movie. But at its core, Slither is really kind of a love story. You have this couple that are married, played by Elizabeth Banks and Michael Rooker. Rooker plays Grant, Elizabeth Banks plays Starla. And you can tell, even though they've been married for a long time, there's definitely some tension in their marriage. And I think that's kind of the overarching theme of this movie, is that tension kind of causes the events that happen in this movie to happen. And Starla had, an old flame in high school, played by Nathan Fillion, by the name of Bill. It's one of those situations where, this couple, they just never really lined up. The stars weren't aligned. And so both of them went different paths in their lives. They were in the same town, but they ended up with different people. But how this story unfolds is Grant, he goes to this bar, he gets drunk because at the beginning he's trying to get a little lucky with his wife. Doesn't really pan out, so he goes to the bar. He's doing the right thing because he doesn't intend on cheating on his wife, but then he ends up in the woods with this lady, going down this, rabbit hole. And there's this like alien entity. It really looks like one of the eggs in the movie Alien. And it shoots this like slug into Grant. And so the slug pretty much takes over Grant and his body starts morphing into this weird shape, this alien-like shape. And he just starts growing bigger and bigger. And this is where the practical effects really get pretty crazy. Don't get me wrong, this movie does have CGI in it, but anywhere where they could get away with using practical effects, they did it. And I'd say a really, really good portion of this movie is practical effects. And it's the gross out type, the type that you don't want to stick your finger in it because you're going to come out and you're going to have like sticky shit all over yourself. It's that type of stuff. Really creative stuff too. I tend to like this stuff if there's a good story wrapped around it. I think if this didn't have that great little love triangle thing going there, then I probably wouldn't like it as much. But it's a James Gunn movie, and with James Gunn, you're going to get comedy in there. which is really needed too, because if this took itself way too seriously with the effects and everything, then it might just be too much. But you know, digging into the backstory, James Gunn always intended to focus more on the characters of this movie. That's what it started out as. Originally, he didn't even want to direct the movie. He just wrote the script and he was going to try to sell it, option it out. But he ended up directing the movie because after they read it, they were like, there's nobody better to direct this than you. You used to work at Troma. You know, he didn't even consider Troma as a major influence into making this movie. It's one of those kind of subconscious things that it just came out because that was his background. He learned so much about effects and everything, and really movie making through Troma. So naturally, it came out in the work with Slither. But luckily, James Gunn knows characters very well. If you've seen his other movies like Guardians of the Galaxy, that's what makes Guardians and his other movies so special. It's just these great, rich, funny, sympathetic characters that he creates. And this movie is full of them. And I like that everybody has kind of like a southern twang, you know? And I'm gonna be honest, I grew up in Mississippi, but normally I don't like movies that are like, I guess, southern in nature when it comes to horror. I'm very, very picky with that type of stuff. But there are exceptions to the rule. And this is definitely an exception. If you play on the strengths of the southern accent mixed with the comedy without going too far and making fun of it, which this one does beautifully. It rides that line perfectly. I mean, don't get me wrong, of course, there's things to make fun of the southern accent. I mean, hell, I had a really strong southern accent before I joined the military. You should hear my parents. But my favorite character might be the mayor, Greg Henry. This guy is a Hollywood legend, one of the best character actors that never gets noticed enough. He's great in everything that he does, and he always plays a dick. Like you might remember him from like Payback. He was also in Body Double. This mayor character, they went through so many actors and they could never land on anybody because everybody overplayed it. And then here comes Greg Henry walking in with the mustard that he has and the confidence, and he just slays the role because he knows exactly how to play the character, where that line is, how to take it in a direction where it's believable but hilarious, because he really steals every scene that he's in. He's funny as hell. And he just has that Greg Henry charm. He's one of those actors that you just cannot duplicate. There will never be another Greg Henry. I want to talk about a couple scenes in this movie. My favorite definitely is the one that's on the cover of the Blu-ray back there, the bathtub scene. Watching the movie, I thought that there would be, you know, like 100 slugs coming into that bathtub, but literally it's just one slug. But you got this character, Kylie, she's in the bathtub, and then she gets attacked by the slug, and how the scene plays out is it ends up in her mouth. And by the way, I didn't even explain that. Like when these slugs go into your mouth, they take you over. Grant being the main host, he can pretty much control everyone that is taken over by the slugs, okay? Got it? So anyway, the slug goes into her mouth, and it's a very tension-filled scene. The slug literally dives into her mouth, but she bites down on it, so it doesn't fully get in there. But as she's biting down on it, she can like see all of Grant's visions, and that plays into the plot later into the movie. But talk about a fantastic scene, because then when she gets down to the truck, her family, who are already zombified, I call them zombies even though they're taken over by the slugs, they're coming around and they're trying to get in the truck, and it's a really funny yet like scary scene. And also the final act, the last scene of this movie, you know, it goes for broke. It's really big. It kind of reminded me, and of course this movie came first, of what they did at the end of The Suicide Squad, his latest movie. How there's this like massive creature. I think James Gunn just likes to have massive like entities or creatures at the end of his movies, because you got Grant at the core of the story. He still just loves his wife, Starla, and he's wanting to reconnect with her. And so she's the only thing that can kind of save the day. She comes in to try to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not really seduce, but I guess just try to manage him. And when in doubt, throw in a propane tank, right? So you got Nathan Fillion, who has this propane tank, and he blows Grant up. But in the end, Slither is such a unique movie. It definitely borrows heavily from other influences. Hell, Greg Henry's character's name is McCready. One of the influences for the practical effects in this movie was The Thing, okay? So at first I thought that this would be, you know, a Night of the Creeps type deal, but no, it's much more than that. Yeah, there's a little bit of Night of the Creeps because of the slugs in here, but, you know, Thinking back to like Cronenberg and Shivers, there are slugs in that movie. And that movie is, I think, more akin in tone to this movie than Night of the Creeps. And to give Lindsay credit, she had to correct me on that because I was thinking, initially, yeah, this is a Night of the Creeps type thing. She's like, oh no, you have no idea. So this is easily one of the most unique, ambitious horror films with great characters I've ever seen. And I don't think it's for people that don't like horror. At the end of the day, it's still for, dyed-in-the-wool horror fans, in my opinion. Trapped on an Island for sure. This movie surprised the hell out of me. Love the hell of it. I would recommend getting the Shout Factory edition with that beautiful slipcover back there. So have you seen, I almost said Slither. So have you guys seen Slither? Let me know down in the comments. Looking forward to hearing them. Also be sure to come over to Killer Flicks where we talk horror all day and every day. And on Fridays, we do Free For All Fridays. Follow my Drumdums on all my socials. Support me on Patreon. Buy me a coffee. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day and Drumdum out.